grab your popcorn and snacks, find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the lights and open your minds. The journey is about to begin. Hey everybody, how's everybody doing over here? Let me get things set up. Whoa, that didn't sound good, did it? Oh man, it's gonna be one of those days, right? Hello everybody, let me get the chat set up and get things opened up over here. Then I'm gonna open up TikTok and then we'll get started. Hey everybody, welcome. My name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team, based out of, I'm going to say it because I can do it on the other two networks, so there. Based out of Sacramento, California. We're 45 strong up and down the state, which means if you think you have a paranormal need that you need help with, whether it's a business or a home, we can help you out with that. It might take us a while to get you. California is like a huge state. However, we will get to you. We have people, like I said, 45 people up and down the state, okay, up and down the state, different branches. We also have people available for Washington haunts, Oregon haunts. We have branches, Hawaiian haunts. We got a bunch of people out there to help you out, even with Sac East. Anyway, what are we doing today? No psychic readings today. Today we're off from readings. I can't mention the other two networks. I'm sorry, you guys, but I'm reading from a paranormal theme book, and this has Christmas stuff in it, but this also has not only Christmas stuff, but it has different holiday tales, and it also has winter tales. That's what the book's about. It's all about things that happen in the darkness of winter. So we're right, like almost in the middle of this book. It's a great book. I read it every year. It's by one of my favorite authors, Sylvia Shults, and it's been a great book. So again, over on TikTok, I won't be doing free readings today, okay? What I will be doing, and this is for you guys too over here, is after this show, I'm going to make a run to the store and grab my Sunday night pizza that I can make. And then we're going to be on around 2:45 p.m. Pacific. Again, that's not good, whatever that noise was. And we're going to be on again around 2:45 p.m. Pacific. Again, we're going to be building on the Vacation Cookie House, the National Lampoon. Thank you for the heart me. The National Lampoon Vacation Cookie House, and we're doing good. I just started putting on the millions of twinkling lights on there. So that's what the primary thing today is to just put those lights on. So we'll see how far we get. I'm hoping we can go from 2:45 to like 6:45, and then call it a night. You don't want it because I know once we get the lights on there, the next step's going to be putting the walls up, letting that dry, and then putting the roof on. And then there's another house behind it. Plus, there's a trailer that I bought that we can use and call it Cousin Eddie's trailer. So that's all coming up. So that'll be at 2:45 p.m. this afternoon. In the meantime, we're going to read for about an hour. And this book is interesting. It has some nasty stories about deaths and stuff in here, but it also has some really interesting ghost stories mixed into all this. And like I said, some of them are based on the holidays. Christmas and that. And some are just winter stories, general stories, reading about things happening in January, February, March, that kind of thing. So as we read on, I think we're a little more than halfway through with it. We're in Hollywood right now. And we just talked about, I think we just did the Thelma Todd thing where they found her in her car, deceased. So now the next topic we got coming up is strange happenings at Todd House. So there must be some ghostly activity going on over there where it wouldn't have been mentioned. Anyway, welcome. Everybody's welcome. Enjoy yourselves. Comment. I won't be able to see your comments on TikTok. Way too tiny from where I'm at. However, if you do gift, that would be nice. Thank you so much. I'm trying to collect 10 Santa Cocos today. If we can do that. I'm also trying to get at least 10,000 likes today for this. So if you could help me out with that, that would be great. I'd appreciate it. But hopefully, one of my moderators will be in there somewhere. They usually are. And hi, Michelle Edwards. That I can see. And just know that if you do gift and I don't see it, and for the likes, I want to thank you already. Okay, I'm thanking you ahead of time because, like I said, for the most part, I'll have my phone buried in the book anyway. All right, so that's where that's at. Now over here, oh, how come that's not running? Hang on, what's going on with my caption? Hang on, did it not kick in? There it goes. And for those of you over here, I do have a caption running at the bottom of the screen. It's not going to let me run twice. Who knows? There we go. Oh, it covers up my name. I see. Never used to do that. Okay. Anyway, I do have a caption running at the bottom of the screen. So if you want to donate to help keep us going and keep us on the air, that would be great. Both sources are down over there. All right. So here we go. And once again, TikTok has a thing about me mentioning the other two apps, so I can't mention them. So I'm sorry about that. So that's where that's at. Okay, so here we go, everybody. I'm going to read for about an hour. What time is it now? It is, 12:14? Let me have a sip of water before I do this. And I'm going to read for about an hour. And for those of you that are wondering, this is my podcast studio. We're going to try and start getting this podcast back up and running. And it's been a while since I've done it. Since I've done a full-blown podcast. It's usually this. It's been reading this book and working on that cookie house. But we're going to start getting that going. I have a fully functional recording studio in here. I can actually bring people in and record them musically and all that stuff. So, okay. So let's do this. And I'll go for about an hour. Like I said, then I'm going to go take a break, go get my dinner, get that set up, or just bring it home, and then the stuff to make dinner. And then I'm going to be back on around 2:45 in the other studio, making beautiful studio. I hope my friend realizes I'm on today. I forgot to tell her. But she'll have to get over it. All right, so here we go. Hi, Kim Tay. Thank you for coming. All right, so the book is The Spirits of Christmas, The Darkside of the Holidays. And as I said before, there are holiday ghost stories in here, but it's also mixed in with some winter stories of woe. And so there's a nice mixture of stories in here that covers all that stuff. So I hope you enjoy it. I love this book. Like I said, I've read it like 4 years in a row. I love this book. And it has a little bit of everything in there. You guys you can go back to the other networks and take a look, because the first whole part of the book was talking about Krampus and all those legends and stuff. The Norwegian legends, the German legends, and all that. So it's a very interesting book. And then it brings us not to present day, but it brings us, like, I would say, maybe into the 1950s or 60s, maybe 70s. So let's do this and let's enjoy it. Grab some, like my intro, but you guys don't hear. Grab some popcorn and snacks. Put your feet up. Put your fuzzy wuzzies on. Put your feet up. Get under a blanket and get that fireplace going. In some people's cases, turn the fireplace on. We had a gas fireplace, and let's have some fun. Okay. So enjoy, and like I said, I won't be able to acknowledge you guys over here, but know that if I do get a gift or those likes and everything, and you are in the room watching, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Okay. Now you guys, on the other hand, okay. So here we go. It's now 12:19. We will go till 1:19 with this. So, strange happenings at Todd House. The oldest private home in Victoria, British Columbia, is a small bungalow on Huron Street. The wooden frame house. Let me make sure you guys got audio over TikTok. That was before we didn't have audio, right? Okay. All right, we got it. All right. Okay, it's a private home in Victoria, British Columbia. It's a small bungalow on Huron Street. The wooden frame house was built in 1851 by John Todd, head trader for the Hudson Bay Company. John Todd was quite the frontier character. He immigrated from Scotland in 1813 to seek his fortune in New Caledonia, as that part of British Columbia was then known. He certainly made the most of the freedom of the Canadian frontier offered. At one point, he ran afoul of the government of the Hudson Bay Company and was banished to the remote outpost of Fort Macleod. He spent 9 years there and used the time to become fluent in several Native American dialects. One anecdote, in particular, reveals Todd's rough and tumble-take, no-crap attitude. In 1847, he was chief trader at Fort Kamloops. When Chief Nicola and his men, what is going on? Hang on, interference. Okay, at Fort Kamloops, when Chief Nicola and his men showed up to attack the fort, Todd showed the chief a cave of gunpowder and threatened to blow himself and the fort sky high if the Kamloops tribe didn't leave the fort in peace. The bluff worked, and Chief Nicola backed down. John Todd was married at least 7 times. Wow. 4 of those marriages were to Native American women. Apparently, his business acumen was not the only asset that was improved by his fluency in native dialects. Todd's multiple marriages produced 10 children. Wanting to keep his growing family safe, Todd made his small home into a fortress. The home was built with defense in mind. The thick wooden front door still graces the house, complete with a bullet hole, said to be from an attack by rival traders from Cadborough Bay. There's also a tunnel that runs from the cellar to a spot some ways from the house, a bolt hole the family could use to escape in the event of an attack. Todd's colorful life ended in 1882, and the house was passed down to his heirs. Colonel and Mrs. T.C. Evans bought the house in 1944. What they didn't know was that their new home had already become the focus of supernatural attention. Mrs. E.C. Turner lived in the Todd house with her daughter from 1929 to 44. She spoke of experiencing eerie feelings in a large upstairs bedroom. Neither she nor her daughter would sleep in that room. The cat, too, would growl and arch her back when she passed the room, as if she could see something. Mrs. Turner couldn't. Or Mrs. Turner couldn't. Sorry about that. The thing is, these pages are small and I have the text up really high, so the paragraphs aren't quite all there, so I'm trying to work through it. Colonel and Mrs. Evans didn't believe in ghosts. Nonetheless, he couldn't deny that the house was extremely old. The cellar door refused to stay closed, even when it was locked. Hats from the hat stand would often be found tossed around the hallway, and Mrs. Evans's antique rocker would often rock by itself in the living room. The colonel did some research on the history of the house. The rumor he'd heard was that one of John Todd's native wives had gone insane and was kept chained in an upstairs bedroom. Oh, that's nice. Colonel and Mrs. Evans regularly opened their home to servicemen during World War II. One night, 2 airmen spent the night at the Todd house. The colonel and his wife, despite their skepticism, couldn't deny that the large bedroom on the upper floor gave them the creeps. So they turned it into the guest room and settled the 2 aviators in for the night. The next morning, Mrs. Evans found the room empty. The 2 men came back later that day, in the daylight, to explain their hurried departure. One man was quoted in an interview, printed in the Vancouver Sun. "We'd just been to sleep for several hours. When I suddenly awoke, I can't really describe what woke me, although it sounded like the rattling of chains. Over in the corner stood..." Okay, I'm going to try and, be correct with this stuff. Over in the corner stood a Native American woman. Her hands held out to me in such a manner that she seemed to be pleading with me to help her. On her arms and legs were what looked like fetters. She kept looking at me, her hands outstretched and saying something that I could not quite catch. As suddenly as she appeared, she was gone. I'll never forget that sight. The spirits of Todd House seemed to be the most active during the holiday season. One morning, the Evanses awoke to find that the Christmas decorations had all been stripped from the walls and the tree, and that the Christmas cards had been swept from the mantle. Everything was all in a pile in the middle of the living room. The ghost even showed up for a New Year's party. Mrs. Evans had hung a porcelain cookie jar from a hook near the fireplace. During the party, the cookie jar started to swing back and forth, in full view of the astonished guests. The jar swung itself for nearly half an hour, as the guests watched in amazement. After the New Year's Eve party, the Todd house became famous as a haunted location. The swinging cookie jar was such a sensation that word about the hauntings in the house got out. Reporters showed up to investigate, and curiosity seekers showed up just to gawk. In early 1947, Colonel Evans began work on installing a new oil furnace. Workmen were digging a hole next to the front porch for the oil storage tank. About 7 feet down, they uncovered a human skeleton. The workmen refused to dig any further, so Colonel Evans excavated the bones himself. The skull was in good shape, but the bones had largely decomposed, and the colonel figured that the body had been covered with quicklime at the time it was buried. A forensic specialist determined that the bones were those of a female of either Asian or Native American descent, and that the woman had been buried over 50 years earlier, making her date of death somewhere before 1897. John Todd died in 1882. Strangely enough, once the bones had been unearthed, the hauntings at the Todd house stopped. Okay. Professor Gladstone and the murderer. The small town of Beachy, Saskatchewan, didn't see much excitement during the year, but the evening of December 10th, 1932, was a special occasion. That night, people were braving the wintry weather and flocking to the small movie theater in town. They weren't coming to see Betty Davis or Gary Cooper, or the antics of the Marx Brothers, or the nice sarcasm of W.C. Fields. They were there to see a live performance by Professor Gladstone, mentalist. A real live mind reader, or so he claimed. The house lights dimmed, and the audience settled in for an evening of exciting entertainment. They had no idea how much drama would shortly come from that small stage. Professor Gladstone was tall, with a distinguished manner well befitting a mind reader and showman. He put on a memorable performance as he worked the show for nearly an hour, astounding the audience with his uncanny powers of mentalism. Unbeknownst to the audience, the show was about to get a lot more interesting. Gladstone stopped his dramatic pacing around the stage and went eerily still for a few long moments. The audience began to murmur their uncertainty. What was wrong? Then Gladstone snapped to attention and stared out over the audience. He locked eyes with the local rancher named Bill Taylor. At this moment, you're thinking of your friend Scotty McLaughlin, Gladstone intoned. As Taylor blinked in astonishment, the mind reader added, Scotty McLaughlin was the victim of a foul, brutal murder. A ripple of shock rustled through the theater. 3 years before, McLaughlin had farmed in the area with a partner named John Schumacher. He'd had plans to sell his share of the farm to Schumacher and move to British Columbia. He'd intended to take the night train out of town on January 16th, 1930. His friends had showed up at the station to see him off and wish him luck, but McLaughlin had never arrived to catch his train. The police had been notified, but the investigation had long gone cold. Thank you for the likes. Professor Gladstone wasn't finished making electrifying announcements. He pointed to another man in the audience and announced, he will find the body, and I myself will be with him when he does. It was another bombshell. The man Gladstone had pointed to was Constable Carey, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer for the town. Constable Carey was himself shocked at Gladstone's revelations. The next morning, he called Royal Canadian Mounted Police Headquarters in Saskatoon. He told Corporal Jack Woods about the previous night's astounding scene at the theater. Woods did a quick background check on Professor Gladstone and decided to reopen the case. Now, whether one believed in mind reading powers or not, Gladstone's act had reminded the community that one of their citizens had been missing for nearly 3 years. If nothing else, the police would do well to take advantage of the renewed interest in the situation. When Corporal Woods arrived, Constable Carey contacted Professor Gladstone, and the three men began to canvass the town of Beachy and the outlying farming community. They spent the entire day talking to people, mostly getting a rehash of the same dead-end information that Carey had heard in January of 1930. But they caught a break in the case late that afternoon. A farmer who was impressed by Gladstone's talents admitted that before McLaughlin had gone missing, John Schumacher had come to see him in a towering rage. The farmer had no idea why Schumacher was so worked up, but he did say that Schumacher had threatened to unalive him. This new evidence was enough to send the policeman, with Gladstone in tow, out to Schumacher's farm that same night. As the tires of the car crunched on Schumacher's driveway, Gladstone insisted that McLaughlin's body was somewhere on that property. John Schumacher, however, stuck to the story he told when McLaughlin had gone missing. He kept the story simple. Scotty had wanted to leave for British Columbia, So he, Schumacher, had paid Scotty a few $100s for his share of the land. He had never seen Scotty again and had no idea where he was now. The Mounties found Schumacher's story a little too pat and started asking more questions. Schumacher, sensing their suspicions, clammed up. Just as the police were about to give up in frustration, Professor Gladstone spoke. He painted a sordid picture of the crime. Scotty had indeed come to Schumacher seeking payment for his share of the farm. But Schumacher had started a fight. The two men had wandered, still arguing, close to the barn. The argument had turned violent. A blow fell, and another, and another. Schumacher had buried McLaughlin's body near the barn. John Schumacher's stubborn silence said more than any desperate denial ever could. The next morning, the police officers at Gladstone returned, and they brought a group of other men from the community. The men were all carrying picks and shovels. The group looked to Professor Gladstone for instructions. The mind reader concentrated fiercely for the first brief minutes. Then he pointed to a frozen pile of manure. Dig there, you'll find him. 2 hours later, the men's hands... Is it the mic? What's doing this? Hang on, guys. I think my mic cable's having issues. 2 hours later, the men's hands were beginning to go numb with the cold. John Schumacher stood nearby, still saying nothing. The group was still working, but they weren't digging with the same frenzy as when they'd started. Could the professor have been wrong this whole time? Suddenly, a shovel edge scraped against not hard frozen dirt, but something more yielding, a woolen sock. There was something in the ground. Soon, the diggers had unearthed an entire skeleton. Shreds of rotting cloth lay limply on the bones. The men fell silent. That scarf, it's Scotty's, one man said in a sick, strangled voice. And by the way, we do have permission from the author and publisher to read the book here on TikTok and everywhere else, so permission is granted, and I'm trying my best to clean this up, so please don't turn me into the internet police, okay? The skull, when pried from the frozen grave and brushed off, showed 3 distinct fractures. John Schumacher broke down and admitted to the murder. He was convicted and sentenced, and justice was finally served. The case brought Professor Gladstone the kind of publicity money just can't buy. His career flourished, and he continued to perform for many years. As good as he was, though, he never had another show as dramatic as the one he played in Beachy, Saskatchewan on December 10th, 1932. All right, next one is the McKay haunting. Constant readers and other fans of the paranormal may remember the case of the 2 English ladies who visited Versailles in 1904 and had the eerie experience of seeming to travel back in time to the era of the French Revolution. A Mr. William McKay had a similar experience in Ireland around 1852. McKay was out hunting waterfowl with his dog sometime towards the beginning of December. It was a bitterly cold night, and the moon had already set. The young man had enjoyed his long day of sport and was just about to head for home when he heard the unfamiliar bark of a strange dog. Then he heard a musket shot. Then he heard a barrage of shots, which he could identify. I hate when it does this. Okay, which he could identify. What the heck? Yeah, that's okay. Sorry about that. It'll jump sometimes. Which you could identify as attack and defense. McKay, although he couldn't see the shooters, still didn't think the gunshots were anything of a paranormal nature. Then he noticed that his courageous hunting dog was crouching in a terrified huddle, trying to crawl between McKay's feet for protection. Faced with his dog's uncharacteristic behavior, McKay started to wonder what exactly was going on around him in the darkness of the marshes. Suddenly, a few hundred yards away, he saw a glow like a house fire. McKay knew the marshes well, and he knew that not only wasn't there a house in that direction, there wasn't really anything in that combustible. And yet, pieces of burning roof, thatch, and timber sparks were falling into the water at his feet with tiny hisses as they extinguished themselves. And still the gunshots continued. They seemed to lessen a bit as the glow of the fire rose. Then the clear note of a bugle sounded, piercing the cold night air. The gunfire stopped, and McKay heard the clop and jingle of a cavalry squad trotting towards the scene of the fire. McKay stood still for what seemed like an eternity. Finally, the sound of horses, going at a walk as they left the scene, faded away into the distance. The phantom glow of the fire had appeared along the path McKay normally would have taken to get home. But he was so terrified that he skirted that area of the marsh and took a longer way home. At breakfast the next morning, the young McKay caught Mary hell from his father for staying out so late. McKay thought quickly and came up with a plausible excuse. Or, so he thought. He explained that while out hunting, he had fallen asleep for a while. He spun the weirdness he'd seen and heard. The barking dog, the gunshots, first the one, and then the barrage of gunfire, the glow of the fire, the bits of burning thatch, and chunks of glowing timber. The horses riding up, then riding away, into a dream. McKay's father gave a knowing snort when his son had finished spinning his white lie. If that's the case, boy, you were dreaming with your eyes open. The father went on to explain that young McKay was not the only person ever to witness the strange series of events. Then the father told his son a family story that had taken place over 150 years before. Near the end of the 17th century, a widow named Sally McKay lived with her three sons on the outer edge of the small McKay settlement. The sons had somehow run afoul of the authorities, and all three were accused of high treason. A warrant was issued for their arrest and delivered to the officer in command of the infantry regiment, which was stationed in the nearby town of Lifford. High treason was a serious offense, so a company of troops was gathered immediately and set off at 11 p.m. There was a simple, narrow bridle path that led from the main road to the McKay's cottage, so the military could only approach in single file. The company arrived at the cottage at midnight and made their way up the narrow path so quietly that the troops moved, that the first inkling Sally and her sons had that something was amiss was that their collie dog started barking. There was a single gunshot and a yelp, then silence. Someone had shot their dog. Sally and her sons raced to the windows. In one glance, they took in the sight of the dead guard dog and the soldiers fanning out to encircle the cottage. Sally grabbed a musket from the stack that kept handy and started to shoot, handing the guns off to her sons to reload when she ran dry. Several soldiers dropped to the ground, either wounded or killed. Sally Mackey was a good shot. No one ever found out if the fire that destroyed the cottage started by accident or was deliberately set. As the fire grew, licking at the timber walls and devouring the thatched roof, Sally stopped shooting, overcome by the smoke and flames. She heaved the door open, gasping for fresh air, then collapsed still inside the burning cottage. The officer in command rushed in, braving smoke and falling burning timbers, and scooped Sally up. He carried her a safe distance from the inferno. Sally was wounded and burned. All three of her sons were unalived, but the soldiers sent to arrest them had gotten the worst of the fight. Many of them were killed and wounded. The sentries in Lifford heard the exchange of gunfire. They sent out a cavalry troop to see what was going on out in the marshes. The troop got there just in time to see the infantry officer drag Sally from the burning cottage. The cavalry milled around for a while, then left as the action was over. Sally McKay was not fatally wounded in the gunfight or the fire, although she had lost all three of her sons and her home. She was down, but not out. She made a full recovery and lived for many years afterwards. She survived to a good old age and delighted in telling people about the firefight in which she'd held off a troop of government soldiers. The Dug Hill Booger. Every state in the Union can lay claim to its own treasure trove of ghost stories, but Illinois seems to have more than its share of terrifying tales. Of course, you can't swing a dead cat in Chicago and the suburbs without smacking a ghost. But the southern tip of Illinois, the area known as Little Egypt, is also rich in ghost lore. In contrast to the urban bustle of Chicago and the suburbs in the northern part of the state, suburban Illinois is quiet. Some would almost say comatose. Southern Illinois is a region that has more in common with its Kentucky and Tennessee neighbors to the south than its big sister Chicago in the north. Southern Illinois is a place of mystery and tall tales. Take Doug Hill, for example. This is a spot about 5 miles west of Jonesboro on State Highway 126. The road here was cut through the bedrock of this part of the state to make an easier passage from the Mississippi River to the interior of southern Illinois. Doug Hill Road is a secluded spot, dark and spooky. It's not quite so terrifying nowadays, in the era of Netflix and McDonald's and Facebook, but this area was once considered one of the most dangerous and most haunted places in southern Illinois. Reports of ambush, robbery, and violence were common, but there was a supernatural element to Doug Hill's reputation as well. Legend says that it was haunted because of an incident that took place during the waning days of the Civil War. In April 1865, a provost marshal named Welch was working in the area. One day he arrested 3 deserters from the Union Army and turned them to the authorities in Jonesboro. He was doing his duty, but word came a few days later that General Lee had surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. The war had ended, so the deserters were released, but the men were still seething over being arrested. They wanted revenge on Provost Marshal Welch. Late that night, Welch was riding home, passing through Doug Hill on his way. The deserters had set up an ambush along the road cut. They shot Welch down in cold blood and left his body lying on the road. Even though the body was discovered only after a short time, no one was ever arrested for the murder. Perhaps because the murderers weren't punished by any earthly court, Welch's ghost soon began to appear on the Doug Hill Road, searching for its own brand of justice. Some people saw the ghost walking along the road, dressed in bloody clothes, begging for help from passing wagons. Most often, though, the ghost just appeared as a figure lying in the middle of the road, where Welch's earthly body had fallen. Troy Taylor writes of the Doug Hill ghost in his book, The Big Book of Illinois Ghost Stories. According to one account, a wagon driver was passing along Doug Hill Road one evening when he saw the body of a man lying face down in the center of the road. He stopped his horses and climbed down to see if he could help. When he leaned down to try and turn the man over, his hands passed right through him. The teamster tried again to lift the body, and again he only touched the dirt beneath it. Terrified, he ran back to his wagon. Cracking the whip, he drove the wagon forward and felt a distinct thump of the wheels passing over the spectral corpse. He looked back once and saw that the body had vanished. The unfortunate Welch was not the only spook that lurks there. A spectral wagon also terrorizes that stretch of road. One night, late December, a farmer named Bill Smith was driving along the road after dark. The ground was frozen hard, and the muddy ruts were chunks of iron in the path. Any wagon driven at a speed faster than a horse could walk would rattle and shake as it jounced over the frozen ground. The bouncing of Smith's wagon worked the yoke loose on his horse's shoulders, so he had to stop to tighten it. Smith brought the wagon to a stop and climbed down from his seat to replace the horse's yoke. He blew on his cold fingers as he worked the stiff leather. He heard the rumble of another wagon approaching, and it was coming fast. Much too fast on a dark road with woods on both sides. There was little room on the narrow trail to pass. Smith knew that if he could get out of the other driver's way, or at least warn him that he was stopped in the middle of the road, they'd both end up killed. Smith shouted a warning into the darkness, as loud as he could. But the thunder of the runaway wagon filled the air, and it seemed impossible that the other driver could even hear him. Smith suddenly realized that the unearthly racket was much closer to him, filling his ears with the pounding of horses' hooves and the clatter of a wooden wagon about to shake itself to splinters. Smith saw a pair of huge black horses snorting foam as they thundered along the road, pulling a wagon with its sideboards rattling with the stress of the ride. The driver sat on the box, cracking the whip and urging the horses on with slaps of the reins. But Smith couldn't see his face in the darkness. The wagon crested the hill, heading straight for Smith, and then it kept arcing up on that trajectory, sailing right into the air above Smith's head. The horses were running, and the wheels were turning as if the wagon was traveling on solid ground rather than thin air. The wagon gained the road again at the crest of the next hill. It had barreled over the dip in the road as if it was flat ground. Smith rose from where he had crouched in terror and soothed his panicked horse. He stared down the road as he thumped on the horse's shoulders in stunned amazement. He couldn't see the phantom wagon anymore, but he could still hear it, and the monstrous thing was 2 miles away at that point. Smith decided it would be a long time before he traveled the Hill Road after dark again. All right. And the next one we have is the Old Royal Ascot Hotel. It's unfortunate, but sometimes beautiful old... Whoa, what'd I do? Ooh, that went big. Man, I can read that without my glasses. Okay. It's unfortunate. But sometimes beautiful old buildings are demolished. We gotta reduce this down a little bit. Come on, come down. There we go. Are demolished in the name of progress. Oh my! Oh, I lost my charger. It'll make it. Demolished in the name of progress. Such was the case. Such was the case with the Royal Ascot Hotel in England. The hotel stood near a racetrack in Berkshire, west of London. Guests of the hotel, of the high-class establishment... Hang on a second, you guys. I'm not seeing the charging going on here. Why? What's going on? Take that one off. We know we're down to 2 dots. Give me a second. Issues, and more issues, right? I can't even check. Well, if I lose you on TikTok, I'm sorry. This is supposed to be charging, but I don't see the charger working right now. The electronics issues. Probably all the ghosties or the ghost stories. All right, here we go. You should be over right because you should have like 60% over there. All right, anyway. An immaculate coach and in dresses and hats of the very latest fashion poured over raceless in the elegant hotel lobby, or enjoy delicacies in the dining room. But all good things come to an end, and the Old Royal Ascot Hotel was put up for auction in the spring of 1964. Okay, by the end of the year, the once grand hotel was slated for destruction. Demolition men moved into the building to prepare it for its date with the wrecking ball. The workers arranged temporary sleeping quarters in some of the 40 rooms of the hotel, but they hadn't been there long when some of the men began to mutter about strange goings-on in the aging building. Shortly after Christmas, the all-night watchman quit in a hurry. He walked off the job one night without even stopping to collect the 2 or 3 days' pay owed to him. When his supervisor finally got in contact with him, the old man swore he'd heard ghostly footsteps in the hotel's hallways. But that wasn't why he'd left so abruptly. It was the sight of a ghostly horse whinnying and stamping late at night in one of the hotel room's doorways. That proved too much for the man. After the night watchman walked off the job, other workmen began to come forward with their own experiences. According to witnesses, the phantom horse was ghostly pale, either white or gray. The men spoke of hearing the spectral horse stamping and snorting in the empty corridors of the derelict hotel. One worker, Thomas Murphy, claimed he'd seen the phantom horse standing under an arch in the hotel. Another man, Pat Bradshaw, had taken over the night watchman's duty. He heard the eerie snorts of an invisible horse, which he said made his hair stand on end. Eventually, only 6 men. Whoa, what happened to me? I disappeared. Good Lord, okay. Ah! So I was a ghost, right? I was a ghost. Is this thing moving on its own? It's moving on its own, isn't it? It just keeps shifting over. I think we're being messed with today. Between what's going on over there, I think we have some activity going on. My house is really haunted, you guys. So I think we got some activity going on today. Eventually, the crew left that were willing to sleep in the hotel. The others were just too spooked. It wasn't only the ghost horse that had the men leaving in droves. One night, as the men came back to the hotel after the day's work, they found themselves unable to open the door. A door which had been left open only minutes before. Older residents had a theory for the ghost horse's origin. When the old Royal Ascot Hotel was being built, horses were used to drag sledges loaded with bricks from the kilns to the building site. One of the horses had collapsed from overwork, and sadly, it had to be put down. Maybe, the old timers theorized, after working so hard to put up the hotel, the horse had returned to haunt the men who were now pulling it down. All right, the aircraft carrier Glory. That's some paranormal activity this morning or this afternoon. Somebody either doesn't like the stories or they're liking the stories and they're in here, they're in here doing creepy things to me. All right, a few days after Christmas 1955, a Mr. Harry Miterhall was working as a painter at Rosie's dockyard in Fife, Scotland. Early that morning, he showed up to work on the aircraft carrier Glory, which was in the dockyard for renovation. Mitherdal had an early breakfast in the dining hall, then went aboard the ship. He kept his work clothes in cabin 8 on the galley deck, so that was where he headed first. Outside the cabin was a locker where he kept a lamp needed for work. This was a double lamp that could light both the cabin and the corridor, so it had a thick electrical cord attached to it. Mitherdal opened the door to cabin 8 and stepped inside to plug in the cable. When he switched on the light, he saw a man standing near the door of the cabin by the dressing table. The man was quite tall, about 5 feet 9 inches, and he was dressed in flying gear suitable for tropic conditions. Blue shorts and a leather flying jacket with a fur collar, the jacket hanging open. On the right-hand side of the jacket, a row of small bombs was painted in red, and a pair of pilot's wings were painted on the left. The man wore a flying helmet pushed up on the back of his head, with a shock of blonde hair sticking out from under the fur of that helmet. On the right side of the man's neck was a long red puckered scar. Meyerthal stared at the man for a moment before realizing he was probably one of the maintenance staff, part of a skeleton crew stationed aboard the carrier while it was docked for repairs. Meyerthal said, "Good morning. Did you enjoy your Christmas?" But the man made no reply to the cheerful greeting. Meyerthal shrugged and stepped out of the cabin to get a leather jacket from his work locker. Suddenly, he stopped frowning. What was the man doing in cabin 8, dressed in full flight gear, so early in the morning? He poked his head back into the cabin to ask the aviator who he was. The room was empty. Meyerthal grabbed the double lamp and flooded the cabin with light. There was only a bunk bed, the dressing table, and a small locker, which was closed. There was no sign of the aviator. Meyerthal dropped the lamp and tore down the hallway, shrieking. A workmate stopped him in his headlong flight down the stairs. He calmed Meyerthal down, and together they went back to investigate the cabin. They found no one in the room. When the naval commander came aboard, both men told him about the strange apparition. The officer, too, helped search the cabin and the corridor. He found no investigation. What happened? Yeah. They found no one in the room. When the naval commander came aboard, both men told him about the strange apparition. Okay, here's where we left off. The officer, too, searched the cabin and the corridor. He found no sign of the flyer with the scarred neck. This was just too much for Meyerthal. He slumped into a chair in a state of shock, had to be escorted off the ship. Rumor spread. and soon the story was making the rounds of the dockyard. Workmen said the Phantom was the ghost of an officer who was killed in a crash landing on the deck of the Glory after returning from a flight over Korea shortly before Christmas during the Korean War. The spectral airman had appeared before the stories insisted. The ghost always showed up in Cabin 8, his old quarters, just after Christmas. There was, however, a flaw in the spook story. It's true that 25 of the men serving aboard the Glory had lost their lives in combat, but none of them had died as a result of a crash landing on the aircraft carrier's deck. Furthermore, no RAF officer had ever served on that particular ship. So the identity of the scarred ghost of the Glory was a complete mystery, and so it remains a mystery. Number 149 Squadron. Have a sip of water, you guys. Hi, everyone. Excuse me. All right. We shall continue. You guys getting spooked out a little bit on these stories? They're kind of spooky. Late 1939, in the early days of the era of war, and World War II, was a time of uncertainty for the Royal Air Force. The German Luftwaffe was strong and aggressive, striking fear into the hearts of civilians on the ground and causing tension in the ranks of the RAF. The RAF hadn't yet built up its strength in either pilots or aircraft. Much of the air fighting in 1939 consisted of attacks of limited strength and effectiveness as the RAF tested itself against the Luftwaffe. Those feints and jabs were still lethal. Many planes were lost, and many pilots died as the RAF struggled to find its footing in the skies. One of the main forces at the time operated out of Mildenhall, based in Suffolk. Pilots of number 149 Squadron, few Vickers Wellington bombers. Unfortunately, Wellingtons were huge, bulky monsters without much firepower. The British were still sending their bombers out in daylight, and the German fighter planes were tearing them apart. There were very few British fighters available to provide an escort for the vulnerable bombers. Radio silence was of paramount importance. So when the bombers left the ground crew at Mildenhall, they had nothing to do but wait until the planes returned, or failed to return. The missions were timed so that the Wellingtons took off in daylight, made their bombing runs, and then ran for home as darkness fell. On December 18th, 1939, coming up on the shortest day of the year, there wasn't much daylight to work with. To guide the bombers to safety, the ground crews lined the runway with cans of paraffin, placed in parallel lines, giving the pilots a place to aim. When the bomber was close enough to begin its descent, the ground crews lit a chance light, which illuminated the runway with a bright yellow beam. 9 Vickers Wellingtons had taken off from Mildenhall earlier that day. 2 of them developed mechanical failures and limped home without having had the chance to drop their payload. The 7 bombers still out were flying in wretched conditions. There was heavy cloud cover, snow and the temperature dropped to well below freezing. One plane, just past 5 p.m., followed by 2 more, that left 4 bombers unaccounted for in the growing winter darkness. The snow came down more heavily as the clock ticked. The late afternoon gloom faded to full night. The bombers were no more than an hour overdue. The ground crews set up the paraffin flares and the chance light, even though they had the sinking feeling the planes would roll down. The men watched nervously, stamping booted feet and blowing on cold fingers. Half an hour passed. Then an officer lifted his head, listening hard. A sound was approaching in the hush of the falling snow. The other men perked up. A plane was definitely on its way to Mildenhall. But something was wrong. Instead of the smooth drone of a Vickers' 2 powerful engines, they heard a choppy, choking cough. The bomber was in serious distress. The mechanics on the ground were men who knew their engines. They could tell immediately that the plane struggling towards them wasn't a Wellington. Light the flares, the ops officer shouted. Pale light flickered down the runway from the paraffin flares, and the chance light added its own yellow glow. The men on the ground stood frozen in their tracks, their eyes wide with stunned disbelief. The plane coming towards them, lit by the weak glow of the flare, was an ancient, fragile contraption. Frayed fabric flapped, taut wires hummed in the cold wind, and two rotted bicycle tires spun in the plane's undercarriage. Tattered canvas surrounded the open cockpit of an FE-2 from the early days of World War I. The stunned crew stared at the pilot. In the glow of the lights, they could clearly see the scarf, goggles, and helmet of a World War I flying ace. The pilot thrust a gloved hand over the side of the cockpit and dropped something. An object plinked onto the tarmac, rolled a few times, then was still. Then the pilot pushed the ancient relic to full power and buzzed out of range of the runway lights. An airman ran over the object the pilot had dropped and picked up, turning it over in his hands. It was a wrench with a piece of paper wrapped around it. The mechanic unwrapped the paper, and the men crowded around to read the handwriting. Wellington Aircraft, number 2961, was down. Not shot down over the continent, where the crew would have had a chance to escape or be taken prisoner. The pilot had coaxed the Vickers bomber as far as he could, trying to get back to Mildenhall, but the valiant plane had lost its struggle over water. The bomber had gone down in the sea, 40 miles from the nearest air-sea rescue outfit. The plane and everyone on board was lost. So why did a relic of a bygone age appear in the skies over Mildenhall to deliver the tragic news? In the Second World War, number 149 Squadron flew Vickers Wellingtons out of Mildenhall. And a generation before, British pilots pioneered the air war, flying from airfields in France. Number 149 Squadron, flying in the First World War, flew FE-2 biplanes. Back already? In the wide body of paranormal writings, there's a very specific type of ghost sighting called a crisis apparition. In this situation, okay, so that story ended. See, that's what I'm saying, is that as I enlarged this stuff to read it, there's no breaks in here, so, okay, so we're on a different story, I think. In this situation, the witness sees a friend or a loved one who appears to be present in the room, but who could not possibly be there, because at that very moment, they had just died, or were dying. A theory for this unnerving event is that when someone is going through extreme stress, as at a point of death, they are somehow able to send a telepathic message to someone with whom they have a strong bond with. Crisis apparitions are fascinating, but sometimes they're hard to verify. Many times, the witness who experiences a crisis apparition is alone or tells someone about their sighting after the fact. There is a famous report, though, that disproves that rule. British RAF pilot David McConnell appeared as roommate at the exact moment McConnell, was dying. But not only did the roommate not realize McConnell was a ghost, he told several people about seeing McConnell well before he got the news of the plane crash that killed his friend. On December 7th, 1918, McConnell had orders to fly his plane from the Scampton base in Lincolnshire to the base at Tadcaster. He left at 11:30 that morning, telling his roommate, Lieutenant Larkin, that he planned to take the train back and return to base in time for the afternoon tea. At 3:25 that afternoon, Larkin was in the room he and McConnell shared, sitting in front of the stove fire and writing letters. Larkin heard a clatter in the hallway. McConnell was an energetic guy, and it wasn't unusual to hear him coming a mile away. Larkin grinned and turned in his chair to face his friend. McConnell was already halfway through the doorway. He was wearing his full flying kit, with his cap pushed back on his head. "Hello, boy," McConnell called. "Hello," Larkin replied. "Back already?" "Yes. Got there all right. Had a good trip." McConnell said, "Well," he banged the door shut and went off down the hall. Larkin turned back to the book he was reading and lit a cigarette. At 3:45, there was a knock on the door. It was Lieutenant Garner Smith, looking for McConnell. All the men had plans to go into Lincoln that evening. "He's back. He just came into the room a few minutes ago," Larkin told him. Garner Smith left, still in search of McConnell. Larkin went down the hall, went down the mess hall for tea, then got dressed and went to Lincoln to join his friends. As Larkin walked into the smoking room of the Albion Hotel, he overheard a group of officers talking in solemn tones. Larkin tried not to eavesdrop on their hushed conversation, but the words he heard made his blood run cold. Tagcaster, McConnell, and crashed. This was too much for Larkin, and he nosed his way into the officers' conversation. They told him that just before they had left the base, they'd gotten word that David McConnell had indeed crashed his camel while trying to fly the plane through dense fog to Tadcaster. The next morning, Larkin had a long conversation with Lieutenant Garner Smith. The other lieutenant tried to convince Larkin that somehow he'd been mistaken about seeing McConnell at 3:30 the previous afternoon. Larkin, though, was adamant. Larkin later wrote to McConnell's father, trying to explain his strange experience. He told the older McConnell that he and David had known each other for 4 months, but had only been roommates for about 6 weeks. Well, they'd had plenty of discussions about political and social topics. Not once did they ever discuss anything remotely spiritual, let alone talked about the paranormal. In his letter, Larkin tried to explain his confusion by talking through it. I was at a loss to solve the problem. There was no disputing the fact that he'd been killed whilst flying to Tadcaster, presumably at 3:25, as we ascertained afterwards that his watch had stopped at that time. I tried to persuade myself that I had not seen him or spoken to him in his room, but I could not make myself believe otherwise, as I was undeniably awake, and his appearance, voice, and manner had all been so natural. All right. Next one is Told You So. Hello, everybody over here at the other two apps. Hello, everybody at TikTok. The hunger to know what comes after physical death can't be denied. It's why we read books like the one I'm reading right now. We all find out, but eventually, of course, but for some people, the compulsion to sneak a peek behind the veil is very tempting. For centuries, people have been making arrangements with trusted friends or loved ones. Whoever dies first should come back and try to communicate with the one left behind. And if the stories are to be believed, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The people trying these experiments aren't crackpots. One of these curious people was Lord Henry Brown, a British statesman who lived during the 19th century. He and his college friend, Geoffrey Garner, were keenly interested in the possibility that a person's soul could survive the death of their body. So intrigued were they that the two friends drew up an agreement that whichever of them died first would appear to the other. They signed this compact in their own blood. They were not playing around. When the men graduated from college, Brom entered government service. Garner also got a government post and was sent off to India. Over the years, the two men gradually lost touch with each other. It wasn't until many years later, when Lord Brom was traveling in Sweden, that he had cause to remember his college friend Garner. Brom and his travel companion had stopped at an inn for the night, and Brom wanted a hot bath after his day's journey. He had a nice relaxing soak and was just about to get out, to get out, towel off, and head off to bed, when he turned his head to look around the bathroom for a towel. There, sitting on a chair, was his friend Geoffrey Garner. Brom lunged out of the bath, tripped, and passed out. How I got out of the bath I know not, he wrote later, but on recovering my senses, I found myself sprawling on the floor. The apparition, or whatever it was, that had taken on the likeness of Garner, had disappeared. Brom was shaken by the sudden appearance of the college friend that he hadn't seen in years, and in his bath, no less. He was further shocked to discover, when he returned home to England, that Geoffrey Garner had died in India on December 19th, the same day Brown had seen him. Okay. Dear Theodosia, to students of history and many Broadway fans, the name of Aaron Burr is synonymous with base treachery for his killings of Alexander Hamilton in a duel in 1804. But fans of the musical Hamilton also know Burr as the adoring papa of Theodosia Burr. Theodosia Burr was Aaron Burr's only child, and she and her father were devoted to each other. After the duel between Hamilton and Burr on July 11th, 1804, Burr found himself on the outs politically. He left New York and knocked around for a while, but eventually managed to get himself accused of treason in 1807 for trying to set up an empire in Mexico. He was later acquitted, but went off to Europe in a self-imposed exile. Throughout all of this, Theodosia was Burr's staunchest supporter. She married Joseph Alston himself, a politician, but she never swayed in her devotion to her father. In 1812, Burr returned to New York and immediately wrote to Theodosia to ask her to come see him, now that he was back home. Theodosia, although she wasn't in the best of health, jumped at the chance to visit her dad. Earlier that year, in June, Theodosia had lost her 10-year-old son Aaron Burr Alston to malaria. She had been frail since the boy's birth, and it's possible she was suffering from uterine cancer. On December 10th, 1812, Joseph Alston had been elected governor of South Carolina. With the duties of his new position, he couldn't take time off to accompany Theodosia to New York. The War of 1812 was in full swing, and travel on the Atlantic was really dangerous. But Theodosia was so eager to see her father, who'd been away in Europe for years, that she bought passage on the Patriot and headed north. Soon after the ship's departure from Charleston, South Carolina, on December 30th, the Patriot vanished without a trace off the coast of the Carolinas. Rumors swirled around. Stories flew that she had unalived herself after resisting the advances of the pirate Octavio Chauvet, or that she had written farewell letters to her husband and her father and had put them in a champagne bottle, which she threw into the sea before being executed, or that she had been captured and taken to Bermuda as a pirate's mistress. One particularly fanciful tale claimed that she had ended up in Texas, on the Gulf Coast, and had married an Indian chief. A clue to Theodosia's possible fate came in 1819 with the execution of Jean de Farges and Robert Johnson. In an article published in the New York Advertiser, the condemned men claimed to have been crew members aboard the ill-fated Patriot. They said they had led a mutiny and had scuttled the ship, killing all on board. But the most solid evidence came to light in 1878 with the publication of an article in the New York Times. A fellow named Benjamin Burdick, described as a hard, rough old salt, had made a deathbed confession at a poorhouse in Michigan. He told the minister's wife that he'd been a sailor on a pirate ship that had overtaken the Patriot. The minister's wife wrote up what Burdick told her and reported the tale to the paper. He said there was one lady on board who was beautiful, appearing intelligent and cultivated, who gave her name as Mrs. Theodosia Alston. When her turn came to walk the fatal plank, she asked for a few moments' time, which was gruffly granted for her. She then returned to her berth and changed her apparel, appearing on deck in a few moments, clad in pure white garments. And with the Bible in her hand, she announced that she was ready. She appeared calm and composed, as if she were at home, and not a tremor crept over her frame or a pallor overspread her features as she toward her fate. As she was taking the fatal steps, she fell and raised her eyes to heaven. She fell and sank without a murmur or sigh. This story lends credence to an oddity that turned up in Nags Head, North Carolina, after the Civil War. A portrait owned by a woman who was quite elderly at the time. Her family said she had made a living by looting ships that ran aground on the Outer Banks. In 1813, a vessel had been attacked by pirates and drifted into the family's clutches. They found no one on board, but they did find some valuables that the pirates had overlooked, including a portrait of a dark-haired pretty woman in white. Descendants of Aaron Burr have noted the portrait's resemblance to Theodosia. Theodosia Burr, Alston's spirit, has a wide-ranging territory. She is seen in her plantation house in South Carolina, and her spirit, at least, has finally reached her father's home in New York. One, if by land, two, if by sea, is a restaurant in Greenwich Village that is located on the carriage house once owned and operated by Aaron Burr. Theodosia has been seen floating through the restaurant, wearing a long flowing white dress. In life, she is said to have adored wearing jewelry, especially glittering earrings. Women sitting at restaurants, both the restaurant bar, have reported that someone invisible tends to tug on dangling earrings. Theodosia's ghost, again wearing the same flowing white dress, has also been seen near the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse. She appears there most often during foul weather or on foggy nights. Her ghost roams these sandy beaches because of one of history's most bizarre coincidences. In 1773, Alexander Hamilton was a passenger on a boat called the Thunderbolt when it was caught in a storm off the Outer Banks. The captain of the boat tried to make for shore, but there was no lighthouse, to guide him. He then tried to ride out the storm off of Cape Hatteras, but high waves pummeled the boat. The rocking of the ship spilled glowing coals out of the stove onto the wooden floor of the galley and started a fire that nearly spelled disaster for the Thunderbolt. Luckily, the fire was contained, and when the gale winds died, the ship limped into port. After that harrowing experience, Hamilton swore that someday he'd make sure that a lighthouse was built on Cape Hatteras. After the Revolutionary War, Hamilton was appointed Secretary of the Treasury. Here was his chance to make good on his promise of a decade before. He twisted arms to get a congressional appropriation for a lighthouse at Cape Hatteras, where my dad was stationed. One of the arms he twisted was that of Aaron Burr. Burr was irked at Hamilton's manipulations, and this irritation only fanned the flames of the feud between the two men. Decades later, the Patriots' gruesome end came not far from the Cape Hatteras Lighthouse, the same beacon built by Theodosia's father's bitter rival. Unfortunately, with Theodosia, the lighthouse did nothing to save her, but it could have. There's a theory that the Patriot was not attacked at sea, but rather lured to shore by pirates working on land, who showed a light at Nag's Head to confuse the Patriot's captain. If the captain had followed the beacon at Cape Hatteras instead, he wouldn't have been taken in by the fate of the false light. We wouldn't have half the ghost stories we do if it weren't for the history behind them. All right, everybody, that's going to do it. I think we've been on for an hour. I think. Is there a master clock? Yeah, we made the hour. So anyway, I'll be back doing the book read tomorrow, next Sunday at noon Pacific. And in the meantime, I've got to go run some errands, and I'll be back around between 2:45 and 3 p.m. Pacific to do that, to work on that cookie house, which is coming along really nicely. So if you want to join me here on all three networks, we're going to be on all three networks. If you want to join me to build that cookie house and see if we can get to the point where we're putting the walls up, that would be great, because I'll probably work at least 3 hours on it, 3 to 4 hours on it today before we call it a day. So I want to thank everybody for coming. You'll be back tonight. All right, it's going to be 3 p.m. Pacific, okay? No psychic readings. We're going to be working on the cookie house, just to let you guys know. Wow, 2,000 likes. Thank you. So it's because I have to give my mind a rest at least once a week. My mind has to my mind has to de-stress from all the psychic readings. So again, I will see you guys between 2:45 and 3 p.m. Pacific today, and we'll continue building that cookie house. I did manage to get the the little dots for the lights. I did manage to get them all along the roof. So we started that. So now it's a matter of putting those lights all over the other walls of the building. Excuse me. So anyway, I will see you guys over here on TikTok. I will see you in about an hour and a half. Okay, so I'll touch base with you guys. Come on in so we can build this thing together. We can tell ghost stories and do all kinds of things like that. All right. Have a good night, TikTok. I will see you I will see you at 3:45. I mean 3 o'clock. What am I saying? I don't know what I'm saying. Thank you for everything, you guys. Let me get us out of here today. Okay. As for you people, no, I'll be back. Now I can mention Facebook and YouTube. So I'll be back again at around 2:45, in between 2:45 3 o'clock, as I'm leaving in about 5 minutes to go grab some stuff for my to make my dinner tonight. And I'll be back, and we'll be working at least maybe 3 to 4 hours on that cookie house. It's coming along nicely, and I was real happy with it yesterday when I was working on it. All right, everybody, I'll see you later, and I hope you have a great day. If you don't if you don't join me at 2:45, great rest of your Sunday. I will be back tomorrow with 6:30 p.m. Pacific to do psychic readings over on TikTok readings. Okay, all right, have a great one.